Welcome, Wargamers. Doug here from 2 Plus Stuff, and today I wanted to share a conversation that I had to have, a little interview with Greg Horton of Electa Studios, who I've had on before, and also Mike Hutchinson, who is the creator of the game Gaslands, which is beloved by many, and is the leader over at Planet Smasher Games. And so basically we wanted to talk all about Hobgoblin. This is the fantasy wargame alternative that uses rank and flank rules, but is meant to be brutally fast and just incredibly streamlined and efficient to make these kind of scale miniature games really fun. You cannot overstate how much fast and brutal really come into play here. I've been looking at doing the game. I did a whole series on making units in the game, both physically with bases and then also with points and keywords and that kind of stuff. I'm also looking at doing it in 15mm. That's possible because it sounds like a really fun hobby project. So Mike and Greg came on just to answer a few questions, introduce Hobgoblins. Unfortunately, their Kickstarter launched a little bit earlier than expected, and we had some scheduling issues, so this is coming out late. As of the time of recording, on the 13th, there is like 3 days left to fund this. And so it's already fully funded. It's well past its initial goal. They're cranking out milestones and doing a lot of great community work. So please go check out Hobgoblins. And while you're looking at the game and its pictures, please leave this playing because I think you're really going to enjoy these guys. Let's get to that interview right now. Welcome back, everybody. I am here with Greg Horton of Electa Studios and Mike Hutchinson. How are you doing, guys?
Tops.
I am also doing tops.
Tops. Okay.
Tops.
I have never heard this expression. I dig it.
Sorry, that was a little bit Beano from the UK here.
Yeah, and so as we mentioned before, I have you guys on here because Hobgoblin is coming out, and I could not be more excited about it. I first met Greg and heard about the game at Adepticon, and I immediately went and sat, got some water, and as I was sitting, I was reading the rules. This is pretty dang cool. I like this. So I wanted to have you guys on and just talk about Hobgoblin, whatever you'd like from the design end or the narrative side of things. And I have some questions here, but really just want to get to know you guys, and you're welcome here anytime on the channel. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves individually, like your nerd cred? So let's start with you, Mike.
Hello. My name's Mike. I design miniature games. I've been doing that for a while. I took a little break in my late teens and 20s to court women and then marry one. And as soon as that job was done, I was back onto the designing war games. My nerd creds are behind me. This is my history of war games, including the 70s stuff. Here is all of my Games Workshop stuff.
Nice.
Just out of play. Here's all my role-playing games, and here's all the reference library for when I want to be inspired with pictures of spaceships or stories of Norse mythology.
That's a good summation. I like that. How about you, Greg?
I am a relatively new to the scene tabletop neophyte, but I lucked out and I'm good friends with Sean Sutter in California, and with Mike and Sean and Ash Barker and Joey McCullough and Joey McGuire. We started a Blaster together, and that's how I got my start. And then now I'm producing tabletop games through my own publisher called Electa Studio, and Hobgoblin is our first game.
Awesome. Well, awesome. Let's not waste any more time. We'll jump right into Hobgoblin. So tell me about it. You can, I guess, tell me your favorite parts of it, maybe the ones that you have your hands on the most, but tell me what Hobgoblin is in your own words. Let's start with Greg this time. I'll pick on you again.
Hobgoblin is a fun rank and flank battle game where you don't argue over little things. There's a lot of action on the table, and it goes quickly and still leaves you feeling satisfied. You don't feel like it's a quick, light, popcorn and beer type or peanuts and beer type game. It feels like a real hardcore war game, but it just feels fun and like it changes all the time. And for us, as on the publisher side, It's miniatures agnostic, meaning you can use any minis you want.
Mhm.
So anything you put your time into to hobby, and even if you just want to imagine something completely new that hasn't been on the scene and kit bash and get crazy and invent in this world, this is the game for you for sure.
All right. Well, Mike, I saved you for a second because that's kind of like the final word when when the designer tells you why they like a thing. I wanted to hear it. So,
Yeah.
Well, so like one of the fun things about the Hobgoblin Kickstarter that we've got running right now is that like this is like beyond sort of like my perfect imagining of what Hobgoblin could have been. Like when I started working on this 7 years ago, it was with an enthusiasm and like a specific vision of what the gameplay could be like and what it could be like to be able to build any army that I wanted and have everything that I painted be like equally interesting a choice and worth putting on the table. But then Greg sort of threw two things in front of me. One was this incredible artwork from Crom, which was just like dripping in this really like awesome sort of, I don't know, just like it's really free and energetic and like not I don't know, just it's got this comic book vibe, but it's just really sort of scratchy and fast and really filled with personality. But that really got my imagination going. And then he threw this gauntlet down, was like, Mike, I'm making a rule book. It's not going to just be that like 12 pages of rules that you've written. It has to be filled with goodies for us to enjoy. Write me some more goodies. And threw down, they're like, no, it can't just be a game. It has to have a setting. And I hadn't written a setting for this game when Greg and I were first talking about it. And he threw that down, and I was like, oh, I don't know. Like I've done sort of lightweight stuff for like Gaslands has got this, you know, very sort of enough setting to get your imagination going, but like not enough that it cramps your style.
It's a vibe.
It's more like to get you into the headspace that other things can bring. But like with a fantasy battle game, it's like, whoa, you can invent a whole world. And so that was kind of like, for me, stemming out from the game, which I really kind of knew roughly where I wanted to go with. There was this whole extra challenge of like, if I was going to invent a fantasy world and then credibly deliver it to people, how the heck do you do that? Because that's an exciting new challenge.
Well, I mean, that's a great segue. So let's start talking about the actual story, because the document I've been doing videos and working off of doesn't have much of a lore section. So I would love to hear straight from the source.
Sneaky peeks. Right, so imagine, if you will, the frozen dead surface of this fantasy world. There are probably, you know, the crippled spires of elven castles and, you know, the burned out remnants now frozen stiff of like goblin camps and stuff. Everyone had to dig down into the earth. They started to shelter in caves, and then they had to expand the caves because whatever this ice was, it wasn't going away. And so the beginnings of this world in my mind was asking the question, like, I'm an old-fashioned guy. Like, fantasy worlds have to start with a map. That's what you do. You open the thing and there's a map. But what I was trying to find was like, well, okay, where do we go? How can I turn the map around and make something different and interesting with it? So I took the map and I turned it on its side and drew. I asked Google, how deep is the crust of the Earth? And it turns out it's like about 1,500 miles deep. And I was like, oh, what if that's the map? So from the cold, dead surface of the world, these fantasy races burrowed down and dug and dug. And as they got lower, you know, things became stranger and colder, but then they become warmer as you get closer to the sort of infernal core of this world. And not only that, as they were digging and expanding this ever-growing network of sort of tunnels and dungeons and colossal caves containing oceans and massive cities and so forth, they began stumbling across here and there, puncturing through to other tunnels, older tunnels that seemed to have previously existed. And what emerges is that maybe there's a sort of shadow network of tunnels that are much more ancient than even whatever catastrophe caused these people to flee to the underground realms. And so that gave a lot of additional okay, so there's something else going on here behind it. So the land, as the world that I've sort of described there, I call Rotvolden, and Rotvolden has many different layers with different biomes, because ultimately writing a setting is about providing gaming hooks and army hooks and hobby hooks and stuff. So it has to be big enough for everything to exist that people would want. And also the fact that if you burrow down across, you cut a slice out of the globe and you burrow down and make a map, that's only one of maybe 360, or indeed any number of slices that you could cut out, and you could draw your own map downwards.
Yeah, that was actually my first thought when I saw the map, because that was included in there without any context to the lore. You're like, okay, so I'm assuming I made some logical guesses that seem to have panned out. We're digging to the core of the earth. And I'm looking at this and I was like, it almost looked like a what are those ant farm things?
Yes, exactly. It's exactly the image in my mind.
But it's three-dimensional and it's everywhere, and that's massive. I mean, it's massive. So much space. And to the folks who think oh, so it's just all subterranean, I could easily see rules and everything working for Land of the Lost. There's a whole forest and there's T-Rex. You can do whatever you want in all the vastness of the earth. So I think that was awesome. The picture of the side slice of earth was pretty great. I had mentioned to Greg in our last chat that one of my favorite things was just sprinkling on random names for things, just chambers or corridors that they don't have to have a reason. It's just giving people a chance to come up with a cool little route through the earth to the center was a cool, neat idea. Are you looking to do what do you call it? A campaign is the first word that comes to mind, but legacy games where you can track, where you are in the cave system or something like that?
So I think, and Greg will correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're experimenting with what we can get away with in terms of a campaign system. Game design, Mike, I'm sort of obsessed with campaigns, but in two ways. One is everyone expects them and wants them and actually doesn't play them very often.
Yes.
And then the other thing is they're incredibly difficult to write and even harder to play test. But I've written a load, so we've got some good ideas, and Greg has thrown some really interesting ideas out recently. So I think, I don't know, Greg, what do you want to say about campaign system?
Stay tuned to Blaster.
Yeah, maybe that's not a bad idea at all. The thing is that with campaigns, you get to allow players to become part of the narrative.
Yeah.
And so that's really the tempting part for me, is that you allow them to engage their imaginations and not just give them permission to make their own cave army,
right,
but it actually gives them some sense of they're part of the story, and here's how it goes. I love the idea of the exploration part, especially just because when you go on a conquest on the surface of the earth, it's I want to control this spot. Mm-hmm. But when you're in the darkness, it's an exploratory thing as well. We don't know what's down here, what's over here, what's over there, and then what do you bump into and have to survive against. And all of that in the context of insanely powerful, magical things going on is cool. So, what Mike's hinting at, though, on our side is that for the campaign for the Kickstarter, one of the things we're toying around with is these evil artifacts, which I'll let Mike explain. But if your general is possessing an evil artifact that's slowly corrupting him over or her over time, what kind of power does that grant, and what kind of negatives does that contribute to you as you start to accept power from a corrupting force? So that's loosely just the concept for our first kind of whack at it. But to Mike's
think
point,
it's
we don't.
yeah,
If we do anything, we're gonna want to do it
Right,
well.
of course. Yeah,
so
I'm not trying to tie you guys down to anything.
yeah, and it's worth saying
How dare you.
there's a
I
lot in the rule book that's been well developed and play tested over the last the 7 years since it's been in development, but very like intensely over the last 2 years. But a campaign system wasn't one of them, so we'll only put it in if we're really comfortable and excited by it. But to talk about the cursed artifacts, that's the other part of the lore that I think is worth mentioning, which is again, to get a little bit meta, it's like one of the questions I asked myself fairly early on is like, whatever this setting does, it has to have an answer for why are there so many armies and why are they fighting all the time and why do these armies keep coming and fighting some more? And so like in my imagination, what is really exciting and fun is to sort of cast a little bit of that, like a player of an army of toy soldiers, and sort of transform that into the fantasy. And so I really love the idea that many of these armies are, they are created, they are manifested by the general. So they might begin as a general of an orc army, but then as orcs fall in battle, maybe they have the ability to resurrect them, or maybe they have the ability to summon golems, or maybe they have the sort of ability to bring spirits back, or all these different ways that that armies might be sort of magically manifested. And what I like the idea of is that, as Greg's alluded to, is like it's an exchange of power, where having penetrated into the like elder roots that are hidden away in the sort of shadow tunnels, they've discovered these cursed artifacts that are calling out to people. And having acquired one of these, you've essentially got some kind of Faustian bargain where the creator of that is maybe channeling power, but also bringing themselves back into reality through your continued like use of the power to summon more armies. And the more you go on campaigns of rampaging destruction and suffer casualties at the hand of your enemies, the more you're sort of incentivized to bring up more mud golems and rock people and summon the spirits of the fallen and all this kind of stuff. And it not only does it sort of answer the question like, why are there so many armies and why are there people rampaging across this realm, but it also answers the question of like, not that you have to, but I like the fact that it does present an answer to like, why is it okay to just have armies where like you're an orc army but you've got some like undead skeletons in it as well? Well, of course, that's part of maybe like what this particular the particular cursed artifact allows them to do.
I think that's rad. So yeah, I mean, if you haven't picked up on it and you're listening, like this is the most free-form army construction and design I've ever seen. So yeah, to your point, orcs with a couple of skeletons, why not, man? I got my big rock boar. I could use him now that he's been deleted from other games. So, we're gonna talk.
What? Hold on. I got a timeout for a second.
Okay.
You know what I'm realizing, and it kind of makes me mad.
What's
it's
up?
like, how come skeletons are always human?
They are always human. I know.
So I mean, that's a lovely segue, because one of the things that like the big bloom of like independent makers of STL models is allowing, like, I have finally got undead beastmen and I have got undead goblins, and like these models they weren't viable. This was long tail stuff that was not viable until like 3D printing and the STL patron sort of market bloomed into this place where just unbridled creativity of miniatures can come out. And so Hobgoblin was not written with 3D printing in mind, but it's a heck of a good partnership. And I'm super excited because as a like independent game designer and maker of things, I'm super appreciative of the relationship that I built through the Friends of Gatland scheme with a bunch of independent makers doing laser cut stuff and 3D prints of weapons and ding dongs like that. And to be able to create a game which so seamlessly allows people to use their Asgard Rising miniatures or their Lost Kingdom miniatures, or like not just from the big hard plastic manufacturers, but from anything that they want to use and combine. And every month they're getting delicious new miniatures, and it's like, well, how do I fit this into an army? Well, we got the answer for you.
Well, to that point, I wanted to kind of throw this out there. Like, one of the reasons that Hobgoblin really appealed to me is I kind of see this trend happening. I want to know your guys' opinion on it, but basically, like, I feel like 3D printing is doing for indie games what the Kindle did for indie authors. So, if you don't know, my wife is a full-time indie author. She writes contemporary romance, and that device fundamentally changed how publishing functions in the modern world. That she doesn't need a publisher. We're doing good. We're bearing down on 6 figures from 0 in about 3 years. Like, she just is. I mean, she writes like 10K 1,000 times a day. I don't know. It's ridiculous. But anyway, and so, like, looking at the trajectory of stuff, of just knowing that, like, once 3D printing becomes ubiquitous, which I think it will eventually, like, these kinds of games where you can just, your imagination is the limit, like, these are the coolest things, and they're going to see a whole new kind of life, I guess. But I'm stoked for you. So anyway, that's all. I just wanted to cap that thought of somehow we got here from there's no inhuman skeletons, but
so the question that you have is, can you repeat that real quick? I think the question is, what do we think about?
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, do you see 3D printing as sort of like the next big step for wargaming, knowing the kinds of games that you like to create? I mean, maybe not.
So here's the thing about games in general,
okay,
is that they're holistic enterprises. So even a video game is leaning on its writing, its video, like, or its graphics, its community engagement. Like, there's games fire on all cylinders, and so you can't have a great game that's just good miniatures, and you can't have a great game that's just the rules, and you can't have a great game that's just the lore. Like, there's all of these things need to fire at the same time, and that is incredibly difficult to produce. And that's sort of what do you call it, in the environments in which you can create collaborative storytelling like that, where the visions can kind of work together, is difficult to make happen. And one of the coolest things is being able to do it where you can. So, like, bringing in an editor with Mike and to help coach on the narrative parts and push ourselves and look at those things as opportunities to build a better game. And then also realize, we're not in a place to start our own production of miniatures yet. So looking at those 3D printers and going, dude, and to Mike's point, like, I have millions of these STLs, and I'm just like, oh man, I wish I had something to play this with, like, that whole connection of those two things is truly a awesome thing, because I think deep down, this is our hobby, right? It's not us. It's not the Electi Studio hobby or another game company hobby. It may be pitched to us like that, but it's kind of fun to, like, bring your own imagination and exploration and have fun with what you want to do. And the game is really meant to reward that. So yes, with 3D printing, heck yeah, amigo. Like, yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry, I went a little rant there, but anything to add there, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super interesting because, like, one of the things that digital publishing did for people like me is that it gave the option of delivering, like, rule books straight into someone's hands. But to Greg's point, like, making an amazing rule book needs, artwork that I can't do, and storytelling that I only just learned how to do, and making, like, the 3D miniatures, I have no idea how to do that stuff. So I think it's super fun to see how 3D printing is unlocked, like, sculpting and miniature production in the way that the Kindle did for authors, but that, like, it's more like the bringing together of these skill sets is still, like, an exciting challenge, and I think that's where, like, a lot of magic can happen. And so
I mean, and that's where you stand out too, right? I mean, absolutely, artwork and everything. It's Hobgoblin's got it all.
Right, but not from one person. We'd like through careful selection of lovely. Yeah, I mean we can't all be Renaissance men that are incredible at everything equally.
So you said you've been working on this for about 7 years. You said like 7, and then the last 2 has been more of a hardcore development.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, when I was listening to that, were the first 5 years kind of nailing down how do we articulate the rules and what regiments are? Like what was
right. So it's peaky. There was a bit at the beginning and there was a bit at the end. So rewind maybe 10 years. I started thinking that I might write a book about what I do for my job. And every time I sat down, because I thought, that'll be good for my career or whatever. And every time I sat down to do it, I would just write another game instead. That's just what my brain was doing. It would just, start writing a miniature game. So I thought, right, okay, this, like, I'm not gonna resist this. So I set myself a challenge to write a new game every month. Okay. And I did that for a year, and then that turned into like 3 years of doing this, where just every month I'd create something somewhat complete, but mostly rubbish. And as part of that process, I ended up with something with this sort of rock, paper, scissors combat system, which I started to really enjoy, particularly because at the time I was playing these massive battles of it was before I had kids, and we had this Saturday gaming club. It's supposed to be in the morning, but it would take all day. And we'd play these like 10, 12,000 point Warhammer battles, and they'd take all day, and they'd be, really good fun with my mates. But it felt like we were fighting with the system. We wanted to have this massive sprawling battle, and it was getting too detailed for us. So I started writing this thing. I was like, this is, I'll do my own version of this.
Yeah.
And then the end times rolled around, and like many budding games designers, I was like, this is it. This is my moment. I have the game that the world needs. So I finished it to a degree, and I play tested it to a degree, and I sent it off to a bunch of publishers and got a bunch of polite rejections and some ignores. I even demoed it to a couple of people. One of my funnest early experiences was going to the warehouse that Gripping Beast run and showing it to them and playing it with those guys. That's awesome. They were very sweet about it, but they didn't pick it up. But the rejection of Hobgoblin led to Osprey asking me a few more questions and discovering in this list of games that I had been writing every month, discovering Gaslands. And so that's how that happened. And then at that point, like full steam on that project, and then another and then another. But during lockdown, I just got really hooked back into pushing units around and rediscovered all the things that I'd loved about my early draft of Hobgoblin. But when I kind of got it back out again, whatever it was, 2.5 years ago, I found that obviously I'd learned a few things since then, and I found a game that still I enjoyed but hadn't clearly understood what exactly it was trying to do, and there were some things that were still fighting within the rule system in terms of what the principles that drove the design were. And so I think at some point I got hold of this like brutally fast with the sort of the term that I used, and that began to really hone the principles of like what I'm going to keep and what I'm going to cut, and trying to make it as fast to play and as much about the sweeping battle line and as little about the fiddling about with specific nitty-gritties on individual combat, but just like how can I make the battle line feel exactly as I want it to feel, and the ebb and flow and sweep of it. Yeah,
that's awesome. That's cool. So we'll get some golden honey words from Greg here. When you were approached with this game, what were the things that you looked at it and were like, obviously we talked about like the lore needed to be sharpened up. You brought the art work to it, but like rules wise, was there anything you wanted to like, you saw it was missing something?
That's like almost too good of a question, but I will say, like, hearing Mike be like, every single publisher that I passed this to rejected it or ignored it makes me feel the most amount of confidence I've ever had in my life.
I mean,
I've
they
made a
didn't know me
huge
from Adam,
mistake.
and it was a bit
Yes,
worse.
exactly.
No, it was good. I mean, I had been playing Gaslands with friends, and we we basically, you know, the the players that wanted to have fun
Yeah.
really liked it. And I was looking at the rules for Hobgoblin, and that became apparent to me that it existed there as well.
Yeah.
And to me personally, I like post-apocalyptic car battle. Like, that's
Yes.
obviously a win, but I'm not the hugest setting fan for that. But for fantasy, I'm a huge fan, and
Really?
like that design, the brain behind, hey, let's try something risky that creates a quick and brutal system for, really just not representing a battle better, in my opinion. Like,
Yeah.
a battle is chaotic and fast. They lumber on for hours, but
Mhm.
it's not like they stay neatly in their blocks and just kind of bounce back and forth off of each other as they like fail their morale checks, right? Like, it's a mess. Once you get in, it's crazy.
Mhm.
And the other thing that was really exciting was the Doom mechanic as well. Mike and I were just getting off working on Blaster with Sean,
Mhm.
and Sean had done Doom token, or not Doom, gore tokens for
Gore,
Sludge.
Yeah.
And they're like, the troops would drop their gore around the board.
Mhm.
And if you're trying to capture an objective and there's piles of gore all around it, it makes sense that those guys are freaked out and they're like, how do I capture this objective? Like, there's just so many dead people here. Like, how long am I going to hold this? So seeing, basically our interpretation of battlefield chaos, morale, health,
Yeah.
wounds, all wrapped up into one elegant mechanic.
Mhm.
The Doom mechanic is super exciting. So those are the sort of things that I saw when I was reading through Hobgoblin.
I dig it. So actually, there's a few rules here that I want to touch on just to kind of get some behind the scenes thoughts on. Let's talk about Doom. So as units are moving up the battlefield and they're charging into combat, taking wounds and delivering them, they have a Doom meter. And how does this affect gameplay for you guys? What do you think? Let's go back to Mike.
Yeah, so as Greg said, it's a kind of like, it's a combined sort of, all the attrition and grimness and injury and really wanting to go home and just general horror. So you roll your hit dice and you get your Doom tokens, and the Doom tokens are basically you build them up, and if they exceed the unit's courage, which always pretty much starts at 10,
Mm-hmm.
then at the end of the round in the Doom phase, a few things are going to happen. One is they're going to sort of explode Doom tokens onto other
Yep.
units nearby. That's the sort of panic mechanic, and then that can explode onto others. And then the other is that if they've got over their Doom tokens, then they get taken off as a casualty, but it's only at the end of the turn, so they've had a chance to do whatever they needed to do. So nothing gets like killed outright without it having a chance to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And as a sort of consolation prize for losing a unit, you get either to take 2 mana tokens, which are the things that you use to cast spells, or you can take a fortune card, which is essentially a kind of a hand of sort of sneaky tactics and twisty events that you can use to change the battlefield situation. So that Doom mechanic is a very like fast way of saying, okay, this is how we'll record damage. It's also how we'll manage morale. It's also how we'll do panic, and it's also how we'll do like the sort of fleeing of units.
Yeah, and what is your favorite? Oh, sorry, I'm going up here. What is your favorite fortune cards? Like some of them, rather. Like, so as an example to our listeners.
Okay, so I've got one favorite that I will mention, which is,
Okay.
It took me a long time to write this one, and it's one of the last ones that got written. But instead of having a sort of anti-magic card where you cast a spell and I have a card that says nope.
Right.
And there was a card like that for a while. Instead, there's a card that redirects the spell onto another unit within a distance. And so this is part of like one of the design principles of this game, is that I really love that old school feeling of like battles that, you know, you see from above and it's like there's a map and, you know, the little arrows are moving up the board.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yes.
there's also a thing in old school games where quite often stuff doesn't happen. Like there's either a nope mechanic or there's just a big chance of the thing not even happening. And in Hobgoblin, I'm always trying to change the game state with everything a player does. And so this card that represents the sort of design principle, which is like, instead of canceling the spell, let's make it amusingly have to go somewhere else. And so you can play to that, because now there's a better and a worse tactical situation to be in when I play that card. But also, like, we had a spell, it was going to be cool, it's still going to be cool, it's just going to be cool and surprising.
I dig it. Greg, do you have a favorite fortune? You just kind of take it as
I'll
it comes?
be honest with you, I take the mana tokens so often.
Oh, okay.
Like,
That makes sense.
and it's just pure negligence. Like, the fortune cards are super powerful. They're not too swingy. They add a little bit of surprise. It's not like I'm choosing purposely not to take them. I do have friends that are like, I want that consistent mana. So they take the tokens, but they don't take the cards. But yeah, they're fun. They just make it something. They're just fun again. Like, it's just another element of fun to have battlefield stuff happen that goes beyond your, you know, control, but they're not so powerful as to throw a battle one way or the other.
It's one of the things that's true about the more simple you make the game resolution mechanics, because you want it to be fast to operate the machine. There's always this tension between making it so simple that there's not enough variance in the system for there to be like truly spiky, surprising moments. And so, like, fortune cards are one of the ways that I build some of that back in, where combats are very fast to resolve, and because of the simplicity of the sort of the rock paper scissor system of the wounding chart, the fortune cards provide, and the same is true of the magic system as well, they provide this way to turn what would have been a known unwinnable situation or a certain situation into something surprising and uncertain, and that means you always have to be planning for those sort of surprising outcomes, which obviously is, you know, that's what you want from the game, to have those kind of both reward good decision making but never be completely, you know, chess-like in its inevitability.
It also just gives that losing player, the player who's losing a unit, which is a feel bad moment, just a moment to be like, oh, cool, I got a card.
Yes.
And it feels, I mean, you read the card and it gives you like a little inspiration of hope, and it also does slowly kind of turn the tide of battle a little bit. You know, you're kind of getting, it kind of helps keep the game moving instead of just like, oh, I guess I lost.
I played a quick demo kind of level one with my wife, and so I had my Savage Orcs that I was talking about on my videos. And yeah, I definitely like included a few units that were as dirt cheap as possible. Like, oh, they're Savage Orcs. These guys are going to run forward real hard and die hard enough to hopefully hold the line. And then I get all those fortune cards, and all the good stuff can come next, and then benefit from them. And it's like, yeah, that's totally legit.
Yeah, as long as you keep those screening troops nice and far away from your good troops, so they don't get doomed or panic.
My favorite fortune here, and I did pull them up here, is run for cover, because I thought it was really interesting. This is one where you add a doom to your unit, and it makes it, you know, which is a bad thing, but you get to advance 4 inches. You're trying to run for cover. I thought that was awesome. It's a good example of, like, it's giving you a tool, and it prompts a choice that is not inherently good or bad, but it has risks. And I was like, I like that.
Right.
Well
yeah. Do you want to pay that little price or not?
Yeah. Because when it's worth it 1,000%, and when it's not, It's no, bad time. I love it. Let's see. So with that said, how big is a game of Hobgoblin? How many points on average were you kind of hoping for people to shoot for?
So I play the game at 4,000 points, or 4.5, or 5,000 points.
Wow.
And I priced the units so that when you play the kind of game size that I tend to play, the points value sounds impressive.
Okay. Yes.
So that's a slightly deliberate aesthetic decision. Okay. But I think like what is true is that it's a potentially a slightly a secret, but actually rank and flank games and skirmish games are the same because you play with about 8 to 12 models.
Yep.
It's just that these models are square. And so like for me, like that sort of 4,000 to 5,000 point army gives you enough space to put cool units in with nice upgrades so that you get to play with some of the special rules, but ends up with that sort of 8 to a dozen units, which is about the right number for a cool game of anything. But don't tell anyone.
Absolutely agree. Actually, I've been promoting Hobgoblins quite a bit for people who play Conquest by Parabellum. It's also a rank and flank game, and it's just easy to promote because it's a 1-to-1 port. But
in terms of the base sizes,
I don't know about the base sizes. I just meant like people are used to using a rank and flank. I do think they fit into all of the.
They do. Yeah,
infantry regiments do for sure. But it was interesting of like when I, as Adepticon this last year, and I stepped back and I looked at my table of Conquest, and then there was like another thing of some other skirmish game. I'm like, we're playing the same thing. Like there's 8 dudes, and then some terrain varies game to game. But that's a cool way to approach it. So approaching the points design with like, this is how many units I want on the board is a really cool idea. I like that quite a bit.
I think the other thing is what's somewhat consistent about the games that I have put out so far is that I'm kind of obsessed with vehicles and like restricted movement and momentum, and that's one of the reasons I find rank and flank games so interesting is that these blocks of troops have this momentum. And I like skirmish games. I play lots of skirmish games, but like 360-degree movement with no momentum is just, for me, like having that restricted movement, having that difficulty and sort of tense decision making, and like the fact that if I put myself into one place, it's really tricky for me to get out of that. So like I have to commit with my every movement that I make is a kind of commitment to future board states.
Yep.
Like I just like that. I just like it.
Yeah, I think the decision points it heightens the importance of obviously positioning, for certainly facing. I mean, just having facing in any game changes things a lot. Let's see here. I had a question for you, Mike. In the actual PDF that I got for Hobgoblin, it mentioned you looked over at your shelf and you saw models that you wanted to use, and that was sort of your inspiration. So let's rewind back to, I guess, almost 10 years ago at this point, I think you said. What were the models that you were looking at that you're like...
I mean, I'll be completely frank. One of the models that I love the most, and I'm quite proud of my paint job, was the Glockkin model from the Warhammer.
Really? I have mine over here. Yeah, I love him.
It's an absolutely rad model, and it just stinks on the battlefield.
Yes,
it always
they've
did.
never gotten it right.
But like particularly in the end times, it was just garbage. It's so disappointing because the first time I put it out on the table,
this message
this is the
not
best model I've ever painted.
Yes.
It also looks badass. It's as tall as a building. Oh, it's dead. It got cannoned.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, like I can't imagine personally painting up that many dudes and then my game going, it's codexed or it's blown up, like we've just destroyed this world. Like either of those things, or even
that like you just chose incorrectly. Like this unit was never going to be good. You're just a fool.
Yeah, I mean, talking to retailers about the game, they're like, you can use any mini you want. I'm like, yeah. And they're thinking like of the shelf, basically, of, you know, their unfortunate miniature choices that they made because they didn't read the forums closely enough. And, and it's terrible.
Or they listened to the representative and bought as many as they could. And then, yep.
Or
every game store has that section where it's just like that's sad Panda Zoo right there.
Yeah, there's a couple of UK miniature retailers, like online stores, where the people who run the stores also win tournaments for the games, and like that's gotta be a winning business strategy for like knowing what to put in your warehouse.
Yep, exactly.
Oh yeah,
exactly. So when you are designing units, so let's play around with the Glockcan here. How do you go about choosing keywords for your, like, how are you articulating stuff in Hobgoblin?
Yeah, so I guess to give a little bit of like an overview of how you build an army or how you build a unit. So there are a set of like sort of generic unit types: light infantry, heavy infantry, light cavalry, heavy cavalry, monstrous infantry, and you pick that, and that kind of gives you the default, the speed and the hit chart that's going to be the thing that you look up when you're in combat. But then you can add. That will give you like a basic points cost as well. So a monster will cost a certain amount of points, but then you can add any number of strengths, which are a kind of keyword that cost you more points. Mm-hmm. And you can add up to 2 weaknesses, which are special keywords that provide some disadvantage on the unit, but also reduce the cost. So if you wanted, an army of sort of slightly ineffective chaff, or kind of like you want lots of goblins, but you don't mind that each of the units is individually quite crummy, then you use this system. So for a Glockkin, for a big monster like that, depending on how hard I want to go into building it into like a ridiculous machine, I would choose a monster, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And then in my army, I get for free 2 upgrades: a general and a battle standard. Okay. So I think I'm going to put a general on this monster, which is fairly good. Like that's how you do like a general on a griffin or something. Like you buy a monster and you stick the general upgrade on it, so that's free. Mm-hmm. But I'm also going to put the wizard upgrade on it. That means this unit can cast spells. Gets one sort of school of abyssal sorcery that it can select and cast from. And then I might consider even going a little bit further and giving it something like tough. To represent its kind of pustules and ability to absorb damage. And then I would be looking at, or I might even I might consider giving it ranged 12 to represent some kind of vomit attack or something, to give it some more options. And then I might look at weaknesses, because I've started to overbuild this unit. It's like, well, it's looking a bit pricey. Yep. Then maybe I want to look at the weaknesses.
It's looking a bit like 1,500 points.
Greg's in the spreadsheet adding this up. We're like, this isn't a great build yet. So then maybe I'm trying to decide, well, what's the role of this unit in my army strategy? Is it going to be the kind of anvil which I expect to be holding the back of the line, and maybe I can get away with putting something like slow as a weakness on this, which is going to reduce the number of movement points it gets, because monsters are quite quick to begin with, and maybe I can get away with it, and then it'll only be as sort of the same speed as some foot slog and infantry. Or maybe maybe I'm going to consider a weakness that makes it more difficult to control, like a berserk weakness, or ravenous, where if it gets stuck into combat and it kills a unit, then it sits there consuming its flesh rather than marching off to the next target. So I might consider some things there to sort of capture some of the flavor that I want from my imagination of the unit, but then also some of the sort of tactical utility I've decided that I might want to deploy. And the good thing about that is that when I play a game and I decide, actually, my strategy's slightly wrong, or I don't like this unit's build, or I think I've slightly overdone this and maybe I need to go a little bit lighter, you can just change this from game to game. You can, like rebuilding your magic deck, you can just tweak things, take things out, swap things around. And that, for me, is one of the pleasures of the Hobgoblin army building system, is that you can keep sort of tweaking and optimizing your list in much the same way that you can do with a sort of armchair generaling of other army games, but just without without having to futz around with your models in any way. This freedom is just given to you, where the gameplay and the model making, you know, they live in the same space, but they're not controlling each other. One isn't ordering the other one around.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought of it in comparison to Magic the Gathering, but that is like deck building. I like that because you're determining your toolbox before you go into the game. That's a good thing to promote.
I think the way I really like to think of it is you get to play game designer. Yeah. You know, there's a lot of, like, as Mike put it, armchair general, like in the forums, this guy's modeled like this. Why doesn't he have a ranged ability? He's clearly got a bow and arrow.
Yeah, exactly.
Or, you know, being able to flex and change from game to game to develop your way of playing. And also, like, I love the dwarf army from Warhammer Fantasy Battles. Like, the dwarves just have always entertained me. I think they're gorgeous, but they're slow, and that doesn't fit my play style at all. And being able to shed that negative and be able to do what I want with my hobby is so cool.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of it. Is like, it's not about using the keywords to recreate fantasy battles, which is kind of what I think some people fell into the trap of doing, of like, I have this GW model and I want to recreate a game, a more fun game to use it. And
it's perfectly functional. It's perfectly serviceable to do that.
Exactly. Yes. But the grander thing, especially for new hobbyists, is the lack of restriction. Like anything. And I like that quite a bit. One thing that you guys had both touched on before is that, like, brutally fast. How long are games taking you? And I guess
6 years.
Oh yeah.
To play one?
Yes. Slightly different.
I mean, so you asked me how large the armies I play. So I play these 4 and 4.5 and 5,000. My playtest games with like my most experienced Hobgoblin playtesting buddy, we almost never take over 90 minutes with those size armies.
That's incredible. I like that.
And when I was doing demos at Adepticon, I got like into turn 2, with 10 to 15 minutes with most of the people coming by. And those were basically my Hobgoblin army cut in half and split up between the two players to kind of just get through it. And they wanted to keep going. And we would go through to round 2 to see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Out of here.
I got 8 minutes of my weekend. I can see how this turns out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's terrific. See, I love games that focus on, for lack of a better word, brutality. Like, don't just, I don't know. You got to start doing things early. And so a game where you can actually get into engagement and start having an easy combat, not easy combat, but like thoughtful one.
Yeah, I think it's weird because, like, we all carry that dichotomy around in us. Like, we want a complicated game and we want something of substance, but then, we don't know how to describe this other part of it, where I think some of the more positive words surrounding it are, it's not speed, it's like really efficiency. Like, we've cut down on things that are bookkeeping that cause the game to go longer.
That's right, because quite often in more complicated systems, one of the slowdown points is operating a complicated resolution system that actually doesn't have any decision making in it. It's just that, like, you made a bunch of interesting decisions about selecting your forces and then arraying them next to each other and then choosing when and how to engage. And then there's just a moment where it's just like, can you just roll the dice for me? And maybe there's something in this. Like, I played a lot of Risk back in the day on a computer that only had EGA graphics with my dad. And he and I would play games of Risk in like 20 minutes. Yeah. Whereas when he was a kid at university, like, a game of Risk would take, most of the weekend. Right. But one of the things that made it so fast is that when you battled, you could press a button that just said, just go hell for leather and just keep attacking until I run out of armies on my Risk country. And the dice would just go like, as the computer just did all the boring resolution stuff. And that, I think, it's the same here. It's like, once I've made all the interesting decisions, can you just delete this part that's just me just figuring out, like, being a computer, like doing a resolution system. It can be enjoyable to operate that machinery, but if you're going for brutal, fast things, then you just have to remove that.
Right.
And it's things like counting how many dice you're going to use for this particular unit. Yep. We still keep the flavor. Like, you're still able to tweak your unit, make it stronger or weaker, or add some dice to the pool or take some dice away. But we also give you other tools that help make it so, like we have a to hit chart, right? That governs what I need to fight against this guy and win. And teaching new players, you do have to slow down and like go, this guy does this to this. But you soon become a Hobgoblin expert and go, I'm light infantry versus heavy infantry. I need to roll a 6. Boom. And you just have all of those components memorized. And as you're going and you're in your 3rd or 4th game of Hobgoblin, now your games are taking much, much less time.
Right, because that combat resolution is literally a snap. Like, it's always 10 dice. Like, I can just about get to the point where I'm memorizing, it's a 4, it's a 5, it's a 3, whatever. Like, very occasionally there'll be a rule that interacts with those numbers in another way. Like, a 1's going to put a 1 when I attack is going to put a doom back on me because I'm reckless or whatever. But it's that like, I don't have to, exactly as you say, Greg, like, I don't have to check who's in contact. I don't have to see which of the models has got multiple attacks. I don't have to make multiple exchanges of dice rolls. And one of the things that somebody fed back quite early on in the design process was like, I don't like just taking wounds. I want to have a saving throw. And so I put a saving throw in for a while, but I took it back out again because it's just another moment where I have to remind you to do something and you have to pick up some dice and then you have to ask me how many dice it was. And then I have to forget and then I have to ask you again. And it's just like, that's maybe only 45 seconds, but add that up. That's how you get 3-hour games rather than 90-minute games. It's just all these little places where there's handover moments and opportunities for, and it's tricky because you don't want to have, I like Kings of War, but I don't want to go as far as a chess clock enableable system where it's like I can basically go and make a cup of tea and come back and find out how your turn went. I want it to be more interactive than that, but there's always this cost, this compromise between how much interaction there is and how much that's going to slow down and cause these handover moments.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, I've never played Kings of War, but it seems to be the same thing where there's long I go then you go kind of things, but right on.
Kings of War is great.
Is it? Yeah, right on. That's awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of wind down our discussion here because I don't want to take too much of your time. I know it's late where you are. Is there anything you would love just people to know about Hobgoblin? Like what you should be excited about and anything like that? I'm giving you a moment.
I am really excited that Greg forced me to write over 15,000 words of fantasy fiction, and I am not embarrassed by it. Like, I'm really excited by the stories that we began to tell in this crazy, mixed up, candle illuminated world. I think like one of the images that I am taking away from the process is imagine, if you will, a vast cavern so large that you can't really see the roof of this cavern, and it's filled with a lake that's like black oil, and somewhere just about illuminated, right in the center of it, isolated in this black lake, is a shining sort of elven ivory castle of thin, spindly, sharp spires, and the roof looks like it's got maybe a star field on it, but it's some kind of reflective gems, and there's just enough torchlight coming off this ivory subterranean elven fortress that and I'm not sure how you get to it. Maybe there's a tiny walkway or something over this oily thing, but I just love this. I love this world where it's a dungeon world, but it's also filled with massive voids into which you can pour crazy things.
That's awesome.
Oh, dude, I mean, for me, the thing I'm most excited about it's just the collaboration and building that we did with the community already. watching people do list building,
Yeah.
and we've decentralized the keywords so they're not locked into a certain faction. So just seeing people's imaginations, and they're creating their own factions, they're creating their own, there's plenty of caves for these armies to populate, and watching people who have never played a rank and file game get super excited about the opportunity to come in and build something of their own is so cool. So that's what I'm most excited about. But the game is excellent too.
Sweet. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for hanging out with me again today. There's the Hobgoblin Kickstarter is still going on. Please go support these two dudes because it's a really cool game. And I'm going to be doing content about it here on the channel in the future once everything's all published and I can point people towards your store and everything. So I'm just really excited for you guys. It looks like your Kickstarter started off fantastically, and I'm stoked.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, I super appreciate the support and helping us out with letting people know about it. It's huge, man.
Gosh. Yes, absolutely. More games where we can use any models we want. Like everything we've discussed, like the ethos of, quite frankly, Mike, everything you talked about when it comes to game design, it makes me want to go buy Gaslands from my local store right now because it's just like,
you should do that.
Yeah, okay, I'll do that.
Heck yeah. Also, you should write the game we talked about last time.
Yes. Actually, my wife is like really excited to help me with that. So I'm like, oh, yes.
Dude, that's a power couple right there. That's gonna be awesome. I can't wait.
Cool. We talked about an American cryptid monster in Virginia as being the core of a miniatures game last time.
Yeah.
The only problem is now it's like super raunchy. There's like all the sex in it.
Oh yeah, just I'm gonna get myself in trouble. Yes.
She's a romance author. That's the joke. Sorry, guys.
No, I was gonna yes and you. Anyway, friends, I will let you guys go. You have a wonderful night, and I'll catch you next time.
All right, bye. Thank you so much, Doug.